They called us weak because we smiled too much. The Zelk Dominion, a race of towering insectoids with chitinous armour thicker than a battleship's hull, believed strength was shown in cold brutality. To them, the idea of kindness, of generosity, was a flaw, a symptom of inferiority. They had seen humans extend hands of friendship across the stars, offering trade, sharing technology, welcoming even the most warlike species with open arms. And so they mistook our kindness for desperation. The Dominion arrived in orbit above Earth, not with diplomacy, but with conquest in mind. They gave us terms, not demands, terms as if we had already surrendered. In their eyes, our history of peaceful alliances was an admission of weakness. They believed we had reached for friendship because we lacked the spine for war. It was a mistake they would not live to repeat. The first attack came without warning. Their ships, colossal things bristling with weapons that could shatter moons, descended upon Mars. The colony fell in minutes. Our military stations were torn apart before they could even scramble fighters. Then they turned toward Earth. They thought the battle was over before it had begun. They thought that we, the fragile humans who spent decades fostering peace, would beg for mercy. Instead, we unleashed fire. Their first clue should have been the silence. No transmissions pleading for surrender, no attempts at negotiation, just an empty, open line. And then the ships came. Not massive fleets with slow-moving dreadnoughts, but fast, nimble craft that slipped past their sensor nets like wraiths. We had been studying them, learning, adapting. Where they relied on brute force, we relied on precision. Where they depended on their superior technology, we exploited their arrogance. Their shields, for all their power, were designed to withstand direct assaults from planetary defenses. They were not built to counter coordinated hit-and-run strikes that exploited every gap and weakness. The first Zelk warship to fall did so before their fleet even realized they were under attack. A single, well-placed railgun round from a human destroyer found the exposed seam between two armor plates, sending a shockwave through the ship's internal structure. One shot, one kill. The second ship fell minutes later, its engines ruptured by a coordinated missile barrage from squadrons of human fighters. By the time they tried to retaliate, half their forward fleet was burning. The Zelk, so used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer size and force, were slow to adjust. They had never encountered an opponent who fought like this, an opponent who did not meet them head-on, but danced around them, slicing at their exposed flanks, retreating before they could return fire. And then came the ground war. They landed expecting to march unopposed. They saw cities standing intact, civilian structures still operating, and believed it to be a sign that we had given up. They thought they were walking into a surrender, a planet too afraid to fight back. That was when the traps were sprung. A single Zelk commander took his first step onto Earth's soil and was immediately incinerated by an underground plasma charge. The street he stood on collapsed, revealing an intricate network of tunnels filled with hidden artillery and waiting soldiers. And then the sky turned red. Human orbital platforms, long thought by the Dominion to be purely defensive, opened fire with pinpoint accuracy, striking only Zelk troop formations while leaving cities untouched. Fighters screamed through the air, unleashing precision strikes that turned enemy positions into blazing infernos. The Zelk, armoured and massive, were terrifying in open battle, but they were slow. Their weapons required charging times. Their movement was hindered by the very bulk that made them so intimidating against lesser foes. They were unstoppable. Against humans, they were prey. We did not fight with brute strength. We fought with speed. We fought with strategy. We fought with every lesson we had learned from 1,000 years of war before we had ever reached the stars. They had expected a slaughter. They had expected fear. Instead, they found a species that had been holding back, a species that had extended kindness not because we needed allies, but because we had nothing to fear. The battle raged, but from the moment the first Dominion ship fell, there was only one possible outcome. Because if there is one thing humans have always understood better than any conqueror, any empire, any so-called superior species, it is that mercy is not a sign of weakness, it is a choice. And we had just chosen to show none. None. The Zelkath did not retreat. They didn't know how. Their entire species was built around dominance, around the belief that retreat was more shameful than death. They had spent centuries rolling over weaker civilizations, absorbing them into their dominion, never once facing an enemy that could match them. So they fought. They adapted in their own way. They abandoned their rigid formations, their reliance on overwhelming firepower, and tried to mimic us. Squads of insectoid warriors moved in smaller groups, attempting ambush tactics in the streets of our cities. They swapped their heavy plasma cannons for faster-firing weapons, hoping to match human soldiers in close-quarters combat. It didn't work. Because while they had been fighting the same kind of war for millennia, we had spent our history learning how to fight anything. Our species had never known a single type of war. We had waged battles in jungles, in frozen wastelands, in the ruins of cities, in the depths of space. The Zelkath adapted once. Humans adapted constantly. And unlike the Dominion, we didn't just fight with weapons. The first signs of the psychological war came in whispers across their communications. Distorted voices breaking through their encrypted channels, taunting them, giving them false orders, leading entire battalions into dead-end alleys where they were slaughtered before they realized what had happened. Then came the supply disruptions. Their dropships, once considered untouchable, began falling from the sky, shot down by human surface-to-air weapons modified specifically to target their engines. The few that made it through found their landing zones swarmed, not by defenseless civilians, but by waiting strike teams armed with explosives. They started to feel it, the slow, creeping realization that they were not fighting a species that was overwhelmed. They were fighting a species that had been holding back. A group of their elite warriors managed to take over a human military outpost near what had once been Mars' colony. They secured it, set up a perimeter, and prepared to use it as a foothold to regroup. It lasted 7 hours. The moment they thought they were safe, the entire complex imploded, the foundation rigged with explosives. They had taken nothing but a death trap. Back on Earth, the battle for the cities continued, but there was no hesitation in the way our soldiers fought, no fear, no uncertainty. Every attack was measured, every retreat a lure to pull the enemy deeper into their own doom. Zelkath warriors, who once towered over their enemies like gods, found themselves being dragged into the sewers, pulled into dark alleyways by unseen hands. They had always seen humanity as fragile, breakable things. Now they were starting to understand. The terror in their ranks grew. We saw it in the way they hesitated before entering buildings, in the way their formations became frantic, their fire unfocused. They had never fought something they couldn't predict. They had never fought an enemy that used their own arrogance against them. Then came the real turning point. One of their command ships, a behemoth of a vessel that had lingered in orbit since the invasion began, shattered in a single instant. It wasn't taken down by our fleet. It wasn't destroyed by any advanced weaponry. It was disabled by a virus, a simple human-made virus that bypassed their firewalls, shut down their navigation, and turned their own life support systems against them. Their own arrogance had been their undoing. They had assumed our technology was beneath them, had underestimated just how dangerous we could be with the right pressure points. The ship fell, crashing into their own ground forces below. The shockwave took out an entire regiment of their best warriors. That was when the Zelkath finally faltered. They still didn't retreat. They couldn't. Their kind had no word for surrender. But they began to hesitate, to slow, and that was all we needed. Because humans, when given an advantage, do not waste it. We pressed harder. The war was not over. But for the first time since the invasion began, the Zelkath knew fear. The Zelkath did not understand fear. Not truly. Not until now. Their species had built itself on the notion that they were the pinnacle of warfare, that they were the end of the... When it came to superior evolution, every species they had encountered before us had either fallen in battle or surrendered before their full strength was even necessary. But humans didn't break. The battle on Earth had shifted. It was no longer a war of conquest for the Zelkath. It was survival. Their forces, once confident and unstoppable, were now fractured, their chain of command in chaos. Their battlefield instincts, honed through generations of fighting predictable opponents, had failed them. They expected battles to be fought a certain way: overwhelming force, direct engagements, brute strength. They had never encountered an enemy who fought like humans, who twisted every rule of engagement, who never allowed a battle to be fought on even ground, who struck like ghosts and vanished before retaliation could land. The skies above the ruined cities were thick with smoke and fire, human strike teams cutting through alien ranks with precision. Where the Zelkath used their natural armour to withstand damage, we used speed and strategy to make sure we were never where they expected. Where they relied on numerical superiority, we used their own expectations against them, luring them into tight corridors and open intersections where their heavy weapons were useless. And now, even their most elite forces were making mistakes. A Zelkath command post deep in the ruins of old Tokyo had been their latest attempt at a stronghold. Their high officers had gathered there, fortified it with thick plasma shields, posted their best warriors at every entrance. They believed it was unbreakable. They believed that because they still didn't fully understand us. The strike came at 3 a.m., Earth time, not from the sky, not from an all-out frontal assault, but from beneath. While the Zelkath sat comfortably in their fortress, believing their position unassailable, human combat engineers had spent the last 3 days tunneling beneath them. When the first breach charges went off, the Zelkath barely had time to react. Explosions rocked their command post from below, collapsing entire floors, cutting off their escape routes before they could even get their weapons ready. The tunnels swarmed with human soldiers, quick, brutal, methodical. The first wave was wiped out before they could fire a shot. The second wave lasted 5 minutes. The officers who survived the initial strike made a fatal mistake. They attempted to retreat. They signalled for extraction, calling down a Zelkath dropship to pull them out of the chaos. They thought they were escaping. Instead, their own dropship detonated in mid-air, taken out by a single human soldier who had scaled a half-ruined skyscraper and fired a guided missile right into the landing bay. The surviving Zelkath were surrounded, cut off. Some of them, for the first time in their species' history, attempted to surrender. No one took prisoners. The battle reports coming in from across the planet showed the same trend. Zelkath forces were unravelling. Their war machines, once thought unstoppable, were now graveyards of twisted metal and shattered armour. Their warriors, once feared for their brute strength, were being picked apart by human snipers before they could even get close. Their ships, still attempting to hold orbit, were being crippled by targeted cyber attacks. Their systems turned against them. And then came the final blow to their morale. The Zelkath homeworld had finally responded to their distress calls. A fleet had been dispatched, reinforcements meant to crush humanity and turn the tide of the war. It was their last hope, their final effort to take back control. They never made it to Earth. Before they could reach our system, before they could even enter the battlefield, something unexpected happened. Something the Zelkath had never encountered before. The fleet disappeared. One by one, their ships dropped off scanners. No distress calls, no transmissions, just silence. The Zelkath on Earth didn't know what had happened, but we did. Because while the war on the ground had been raging, another battle had been fought in the cold void beyond our system. A battle the Zelkath never saw coming. A battle where the hunters had become the hunted, and soon they would understand the full meaning of fear. The Zelkath forces on Earth were breaking. Their once mighty war machine, built on centuries of domination, was now little more than scattered units fighting without cohesion, without direction. The whispers of their missing reinforcements spread through their ranks like wildfire, gnawing at whatever resolve they had left. Their commanders tried to suppress the panic, issuing orders with the same arrogance they had clung to since the war began. But no one was listening anymore, and then the final broadcast came. It was not from their leaders, nor from whatever remained of their high command. It was from us. A single message, transmitted across every remaining Zelkath frequency, spoken in their own language. You are alone. For the first time, they understood what that truly meant. The war had already been decided before the first shot was ever fired. The moment the Zelkath mistook humanity's kindness for weakness, they had sealed their fate. They had assumed we fought for survival, that we fought because we had no other choice. They never realized the truth. We fought because we wanted to, because we had spent our entire history preparing for enemies like them, because every lesson humanity had ever learned, every war we had ever fought had led to this moment. Because while the Zelkath had spent centuries overwhelming civilizations that could never fight back, humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. And now they were on the receiving end. The final offensive began with a coordinated strike across every major battlefield. No more prolonged engagements. No more allowing the Zelkath to think they had a chance to recover. Human shock troops stormed their last strongholds, cutting down any resistance with ruthless efficiency. Fighters screamed overhead, launching pinpoint strikes that left no escape. Tanks and artillery flattened their last lines of defense. And when the Zelkath finally realized they could no longer win, they did something they had never done before. They ran. It was not a retreat in the traditional sense. There was no organized fallback, no structured escape plan. It was chaos. Individual units abandoned their posts. Commanders fled. Entire battalions turned on each other in desperation, trying to reach extraction points that no longer existed. Some tried to surrender. They dropped their weapons, raised their arms, tried to speak in broken human languages. No one listened. Not because we were cruel, not because we lacked mercy, but because this war had never been about survival for us. It had been about sending a message to the Zelkath, a message to the rest of the galaxy. Do not mistake kindness for need. By the end of the day, it was over. The last Zelkath stronghold had fallen. The final remnants of their army had been erased. Their empire, once thought invincible, had been broken, not just in battle, but in spirit. And the fleet that had vanished before reaching Earth? It had been destroyed before it ever saw the planet. Our forces had intercepted it in deep space, dismantling it piece by piece. There were no survivors. Humanity did not conquer the Zelkath. We erased them, and when the rest of the galaxy saw what we had done, when they realized the cost of underestimating the species that had once greeted them with open arms, something changed. The whispers began, the cautious approaches, the sudden silence from those who had once viewed us as lesser. Humanity had always been kind, but now they understood. It had never been because we were weak. It had been because we were strong enough to choose kindness, and we had just shown the universe what happens when we chose otherwise.